Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I've got a great stream with a great guest that I think you're really going to enjoy. Transhumanism is a huge issue, and it's one that I don't think we talk about near enough. It's something that is approaching us at every level of our lives, from the spiritual to our business to our personal lives. Everything we do seems to some way interact with technology. We're being asked to alter our bodies, our minds in so many ways. I think it's critical that we think about this now before it all overtakes us. My guest today is a consultant and an author. He's just written a book called The Transhuman Temptation. Grayson Quay, thank you so much for coming on, man.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, like I said, most people, when they think of transhumanism, they think, okay, this is a problem, but I see it in like a sci-fi movie somewhere. Someone's getting a artificial, cyborg body, something like this. It's very radical. It's in the future. Maybe they start to see a little bit of that in their day-to-day life, but they don't think of themselves as being in a transhuman world. And I think a lot of this comes from a limited definition of what transhumanism would mean, which is something you definitely address in your book. So could you talk to me a little bit about your understanding of transhumanism and how it applies to someone who's just going in through today's world?
Yes, this is one of the big goals I had in my book, was to try to get people to see this larger definition of transhumanism, to kind of see all the ways that it's already infiltrated the world around us. So yeah, like you said, it's something that's very easy to sort of dismiss as science fiction or as kind of kooky. You see, Brian Johnson doing his weird, biohacking thing. I don't know if you saw it the other day. He just tweeted, "There's microplastics in my ejaculate." Like that was
Yeah,
the whole
he's constantly like measuring the number of erections his son gets at night. It's a very disturbing
weird stuff.
obsession for sure.
Yeah, or Ray Kurzweil, who famously, is big on the uploading my brain to the cloud and living forever thing. So yeah, all this very bizarre stuff. They put out these books that are kind of poorly formatted and badly written. They have these weird websites. They make these grandiose predictions that, like, oh, if you can live to 2020, you'll live to be 1,000 years old. And none of it seems to pan out. But the problem is, what they're doing is they're just taking the premises or the ideology that so many people have already accepted just tacitly. It's just kind of in the air we breathe, and sort of taking it to its logical conclusion. They're just a little further down the slippery slope than the rest of us are. The kind of root of transhumanism is really a denial of what you'd call the natural law tradition that, you can find running through the scriptures and through Plato and Aristotle and Cicero and Aquinas and all the way through the Western tradition. This is kind of one of the central ideas of the Western tradition, is that human beings have a nature. And because we have a nature, there's a type of excellence that's fitting to what we are. That there's a type of flourishing that's proper to us. The eudaimonia is the Aristotelian term, and that, our telos, or our goal, is aligned with achieving that. Transhumanism is basically the rejection of all of that. It's this, Nietzschean or Sartrean idea that, humanity has no nature, humanity has no essence except for what we define for ourselves. It's up to you to decide what a good human is. It's up to you to decide what a human is in general. The meaning of your life is to give your life a meaning, right? And once you've accepted that, like once you've sort of enshrined your will in the central location where some fixed idea of human nature used to be, then suddenly all of the things that the transhumanists propose are on the table. There's no reason not to do any of that.
Yeah, and this is a real problem, I think, for many people who think of themselves as political conservatives, because obviously what they are usually trying to do is conserve the last version of their current society. They don't always see around these corners, and one of the problems we run into repeatedly is, as technology develops, we usually are introduced to the technology before we've really evaluated the moral implications of it. And so when you think about abortion or trans stuff, in a lot of ways, Christians were lagging behind on these issues because the technology appeared before the theological bulwark could be built up against these possible problems. And so one of the things that happens when we lose sight of that telos, when we lose sight of our excellence, what we are supposed to be a part of, what tradition we are supposed to achieve that excellence inside, when we don't have that as a guiding light from the beginning, it's very, very easy for technology to go well past us, and we spend all of our time playing catch up because we simply don't recognize the dangers before they've already arrived.
Yeah, and we've lost the philosophical resources that we would need to really draw a line in the sand for how a lot of these technologies are used. So if you take one piece of technology, like artificial wombs, for example, this is a big transhumanist technology. Feminists have been talking about it for decades, going back to, I think, Shulamith Firestone in the 1970s. She says that the other feminists were wrong. It's not society that's oppressive, it's biology. And the only way to conquer that is through artificial wombs. And there hasn't been one yet that really works for humans. It hasn't been tried, but they've tried it on animals and it's worked okay. But there's actually a really valid application for those, which is if, a woman goes into labor before the baby is viable, you could stick it in an artificial womb and let it kind of come to the point of viability. When the technology was first being discussed, there was actually some feminist outcry against it because they thought it would be used to restrict abortion for that reason. It kind of undermines the whole bodily autonomy thing because now suddenly you can expel the intruder without killing it. But that's not the point. The point is to avoid parenthood altogether. But anyway, we don't have the philosophical resources we would need to actually draw that line there and say, no, like this would be a good use of this technology, but making it the new default for human reproduction and just growing all the babies in giant warehouses full of pods would be a step too far, and we're going to restrict that or ban that. That's not going to happen. It's going to be sold to people. This is what always happens: is they'll sell you a new technology with kind of the most unobjectionable version of it possible, or the most unobjectionable use of it possible. So Elon Musk's Neuralink, right? They're smart. The first person they give it to is a quadriplegic who wants to use it to move his mouse around so he can play Civilization 6 and do his online Bible study. But if you think that that's where that technology is going to stop, you're crazy, right? It's going to become a general purpose consumer technology. And suddenly we'll have an entire society of glassy-eyed people who are staring into space, just kind of operating this digital UI with their brains, which will only be a slight deterioration from the current society of glassy-eyed people we have staring at phone screens, but a deterioration nonetheless.
So this actually creates, I think, a problem even for people with our perhaps concerns when it comes to transhumanism, because I think about something like surrogacy, right? Again, something that Christians just had not caught up on. They it was sold to them as, well, this is just helping people who want to have families, right? And that's a pretty easy thing to sell Christian conservatives on. They want people to have the ability to have children. We couldn't have children because of our biological situation or some other one. And so therefore, we're just getting assistance in this. Right now, down the road, we start to see, oh no, there are like gay couples specially ordering children. If they don't get the right one, they force the mother to have abortions. And like all these
in several documented cases, special ordering children specifically to abuse.
Right. And so
case of someone who was arrested for messaging in a group chat saying like how they plan to abuse their surrogate child once it was born.
Right. And so we see that the horrific uses of the technology show up after, the horse is kind of out of the barn. And so I think about this when it comes to an artificial womb. So you say, well, a legitimate use of this would be to keep a child alive who otherwise wouldn't be viable outside the mother's womb, right? But as you point out, once that technology has been sold for that use, there's no reason it won't expand to all the other uses that you're terrified of. The existence of the technology itself is, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. We will get to the end of that use. The most horrifying use will be the one that it actually gets used for, if it exists at all. And so I think this does, and this is probably a much wider question, but we already got here, so I guess we'll deal with it now. This is a much larger problem for, I think, those who are worried about the transhuman issue. Is some level of neo-Ludditism required to eventually avoid some of this, or is ultimately it always about simply trying to find the most ethical use for technologies when they come out, even if they will inevitably get corrupted by some other application?
Yeah, I think there will need to be some kind of point at which people who want to keep their humanity just draw a line in the sand. I think, a good way to do that is just not getting implants, maybe, because I think that'll be, I don't mean like breast implants, though. You probably shouldn't get those either. But I mean, like a neural implant. I think that, kind of letting them inside your head is probably a bridge too far. I really admire people, though, who've tried to make the step back to dumb phones. I haven't taken that step yet myself, but it's something I've thought about a lot. Generally speaking, though, I think that most technologies, there's certain reproductive technologies that I think probably don't have any good uses, really. I would probably ban surrogacy altogether, for example. But with most things, I think it's a question of whether we use it as a tool or whether we use it as something that's going to make us into a different type of being, right? So one of the examples I use in my book is, I'm not against technological innovation. I would love it if a construction worker could go to work and plug a set of 4 robot arms into his brain and operate them with his mind as though they were part of his body, and use them to pick up giant steel girders and carry them around the construction site all day. That would be very cool. It would increase productivity. It would have all these benefits. But when he clocks out, I want him to unplug those and leave them at the work site. I don't want him to go home and move through life as a 6-armed transhuman cyborg. But unfortunately, that's what's going to happen. Or, I think that something like augmented reality technology, where, glasses now and then potentially, implants in the future give you some kind of digital overlay over the visual field that you're perceiving. I think there's a lot of uses for that in the workplace and in job training and in education and things like that. My concern is that you will keep those on all the time, and now suddenly everything you see is mediated by and filtered through the preferences of whatever big tech company controls your neural implants and the augmented reality interface. So get ready for a lot of pop-up ads in your peripheral vision, and perhaps if you're seeing antisocial behavior by members of groups that the powers that be would not want you to form a negative impression of, it'll just blank it out for you or something. Who knows?
Yeah, and this is what really, I think, it creates the huge problem for me is, as you say, of course, we could all see the benefit of some construction worker not having to break his own back to lift all these girders and, having the interface that allows that. But I just think of the cell phone, right? The minute I have this phone, it in theory allows me to do more work, but it also is a Pandora's box into 9,000 other things simultaneously. And so the creation of that interface itself, it's the McLuhan, the medium is the message, right? Ultimately, the way that these things are designed, the way that they're delivered, the way the technology develops, we can't control it. We can't contain it. We can't limit its use in the areas that we want specifically. I think I don't know if you've ever seen this show. It was on Netflix. It was called Altered Carbon.
No.
It's a very interesting show in that the conceit of it is basically people keep all their memories in like this, implant that goes in the back of their spine. And if you want to travel into some other body or you die, you can, be basically moved into these things. But it's only the rich that can really afford to continually swap the bodies and keep, most average people get stuck in some kind of digital slavery with their memory because they can't afford the next upgrade, the next body, that kind of thing. The only people that maintain a real human existence are the Catholics, because they're part of their religious commitment is literally to make their stack unmovable. So they still have to keep the memory thing. They still have to adapt the technology, but they have a hard block on it as part of their religious practice that makes it impossible for anyone to hack in or move them around or, extend their life by moving them to a different body. They are stuck in what they are. And so, that is the only, I think, sci-fi that I've seen in, addressing this issue of transhumanism that explicitly showed how a religious minority might stop themselves from being pulled into this. They're still integrating the technology, but they're putting the heavy limitations on it that make them particularly unique and often seen as backwards in that scenario, but that might be what it would take.
Yeah, I grapple with this a lot in the conclusion of my book, where I look at potential kind of ways forward and ways to sort of arrest the progress of transhumanism. I wish I'd seen that show. It sounds really interesting. One that I talk about a lot is this sci-fi novel by Neil Stephenson from the 90s called The Diamond Age, where there's sort of a kind of minarchist, global justice system of sorts that you can opt into. And then everything else is these kind of large, decentralized, intentional communities. They're called philes, from the Greek PHYLES. And they can be built on ethnicity, on ideology, on religion, on some kind of shared belief system, anything. So one is just the Han Chinese. One is some of them go like full transhumanist. One's called the Drummers, and they just have this neural uplink that turns them into this hive mind, and they just are underground having this constant like hive mind rave orgy. It's real weird. But the one that you kind of spend the most time with in the book is called the Neo-Victorians. And their whole thing is being very intentional about the ways they use this advanced nanotechnology and all the other stuff in this world in order to kind of maintain competitiveness with the other files in this world, while also maintaining the kind of morals and mores of their own society. And I think that the Diamond Age gives you a really good vision of that, because when it's just you or it's just your family, it is really hard to swim against the current with technology. It is really hard to be the only kid on the block without a smartphone. But if you have a large intentional community that's making specific choices to reject these technologies, you can reinforce each other in that, and you can even potentially extract concessions from the outside world. So, one example, this wasn't like a transhumanist technology thing, but a lot of apartment buildings in areas with high Jewish populations will have these Sabbath elevators that stop automatically on every floor because you can't press an electronic button on the Sabbath. That's a way that a particular community's restrictions on the use of technology have caused the outside world to accommodate them in some way. Now, how long our, enlightened, immortal, 300 IQ transhumanist overlords will accept and accommodate us, unaugmented peons in their beautiful utopia is another question. The Catholic Church is an interesting question. I'd love to believe that the church would, and practicing Catholics would reject certain technological innovations in that way. I mean, it is the case that a large number of Catholics use birth control. For example, I think it's like 90% of self-identified Catholics, which doesn't mean a lot. But, if you just look at the ones in the pews, it's a lot lower, of course. But, I think that the church will have to probably be a little more aggressive with excommunicating and disfellowshipping people who disregard its bioethical teachings in this way, if they want to sort of try to hold the line against this onslaught of transhumanism.
Yeah, I would bet much more on the intentional communities that you were pointing to than I would a wider, transnational body, and ultimately applying those things. It's interesting, actually. The scenario that you're describing there from that sci-fi novel sounds an awful lot like neo-reactionary Patchwork. It sounds a lot like Curtis Yarvin and Nick Land suggesting the way that communities could interact in the future. But we said, okay, transhumanism isn't all this sci-fi stuff, and then it's my fault. We immediately went to all the sci-fi explanations and the end of the story first. So maybe we should walk back a little bit and hit some of the things that are happening right now. So one of the things that you point to here is the trans movement itself and body modification. And again, a lot of people would probably not think of this as being transhuman, but it's of course the very, very basic step, right? You're rearranging the body, you're removing organs, you are altering biological processes, and you're not even really getting the real thing. Obviously, in most of these cases, you're getting a very, very ghastly attempt at a facsimile. Whatever you do, don't look into what trans surgery actually does to people, or at least don't eat after. And so, these things are almost horror movie level alterations to a human body to produce a facsimile that is not even close. But again, most people would not think of this as being transhuman. Can you talk a little bit about what opening up the body modification and ability to alter your gender, these kind of things, what does that do to the human mind, and what doors does it open up to transhumanism?
Yeah, so I think that part of it is just that, it all comes back to this rejection of teleology and of an idea of human nature, and of the substitution of the sovereign human will, where we used to believe in human nature. So yeah, the transgender thing is an excellent example. Ideally there would be kind of a teleological understanding of medicine, where, okay, you are a human being. We know what a healthy, flourishing human being looks like. It is my job as a physician to restore you to that state of flourishing. You come to me with your arm broken, I will set your arm so that it heals in the way it used to be. Or even, you come to me with your arm cut off, I'll supply you with a prosthetic that approximates the function of the limb you lost as best as possible in order to do what I can to restore you toward kind of normative human flourishing. Transgenderism throws that out the window. That's, I go to the doctor and say, my left arm makes me upset, I want you to cut it off. And any doctor that would do that, most doctors probably still wouldn't do that, but I've had trans people argue that they should if it's genuinely causing me distress. So to really understand, I think, what the trans movement really is and where it's headed, there's two people you should read. One's Andrea Long Chu, who had these two essays. One was called who's a male to female transgender who famously wrote this long book about how watching sissy porn turned him trans, and that's fine and okay. But he wrote these two essays. One was called something like, if puberty blockers are too extreme for children, then puberty is too. Which right off the bat is just this bizarre false equivalency. Like, one is your body doing what it's naturally supposed to do, and the other one is inhibiting your body in its attempt to carry out this normal physical biological process. The only difference is whether you want it or not, right? It comes back to this idea of the sovereign will and how even your own biology doesn't have the right to restrain that sovereign will. It's all about your desires, not about your nature or about your flourishing. Chu has this other essay called "My New Vagina Won't Make Me Happy, and That's Okay," where he basically argues that he actually admits that he didn't become, I shouldn't use the word, he didn't have the desire to take his own life. Didn't use the S word. There we go. He didn't have the desire to take his own life until he got further along in his transition.
Yeah, did not seek Canadian healthcare.
Yeah, exactly. He didn't have the desire to, until he got further along in his transition. But he says that doesn't make my transition any less valid because I want it. It's what I desire. He actually says, like, happiness and desire are totally separate things, which is a complete rejection of the entire Western tradition, both Christian and classical, right? There's always this idea that your rightly ordered desires will point you toward eudaimonia, toward proper human flourishing, and in the Christian sense, ultimately toward God. And actually, in the Christian understanding, the place where your desire and your happiness becomes fully divorced is hell, because you get what you desire at the cost of the only thing that can ultimately make you happy, which is God. So this is really, there's really a Luciferian impulse here. My original title for the book was actually The Serpent's Promise, because part of my argument is, like, transhumanism goes back to the Garden of Eden in a sense. So that was Andrea Long Chu. The other person you should read is Martine Rothblatt, who is another male to female transgender, was one of the inventors of Sirius satellite radio, interestingly. I think may have gone to school with Chris Rufo, maybe, to business school, something like that. But yeah, Martine Rothblatt wrote this book called From Transgender to Transhuman. And on the cover of this book is actually his avatar in the video game Second Life, who is a Black woman. So it's just kind of, you can see sort of the progression. It's like, physically I can go from being, a white looking Jewish man to a white looking Jewish woman who still looks like a man. But in cyberspace, all this meat isn't holding me back. I can be a black woman if I want. And this is really, he says that the first transgenderism is just kind of a first baby step toward what he calls freedom of form, right? That I am this kind of free floating will and consciousness, and that should be able to take any shape or no shape according to my whims and my desires. So it sort of comes back to what you were talking about with our altered carbon. There's this kind of stick that contains your personality, and that can be swapped between, vat grown bodies or robotic bodies of any type or shape. It can even just kind of bounce around in the cloud and not be physically embodied anywhere. And then at that point, his argument is, once you have people who are just living in virtual spaces entirely, then who's to say that you can't have people who are created in those virtual spaces? These AIs that can then later be downloaded into, vat grown bodies and just walk around and interact with everyone else in society. He actually says, like, if you have an AI assistant that can impersonate you, to make appointments or carry out mundane tasks or whatever, and you die and that AI says, I'm Grayson or I'm Auron now. Rothblatt says we should have a psychiatrist talk to the AI, and if the psychiatrist thinks the AI is close enough, then it can continue your legal existence. It can take possession of all your assets and your birth certificate and everything, and be you, which really just, and then one of his other crazy things is that you can actually, if you fall in love with an AI, you can have children with the AI by just kind of melding your mind files together. And then now you have sort of purely post-human digital beings that have been born there in cyberspace, which I think we're already experiencing with people just getting one-shotted by these chatbots and, falling in love with them and, losing their minds and jumping off buildings and trying to fight the police and all this other stuff. Like, there's really, so far, it's kind of, I think, at the fringes of people who are already very lonely and already maybe a little mentally unstable. But I think as the technology gets better, it's going to swallow up more and more people.
Well, we also have more and more people who are lonely and mentally unstable, so the market's going to keep growing as well.
Yeah. And there's going to be and also there's going to be AIs all over social media and all over any, online platform you use. So you're going to have to perform the Turing test 1 million times a day, and you'll get it wrong some of the time. So we're already seeing an erosion of the idea that there's something special about humanity or human consciousness, right? That's already, the very presence of AIs, the growing presence, is already sort of subtly insinuating into our minds the idea that it's, hey, it's all just information processing. Some of it runs on carbon, some of it runs on silicon, but it's all sort of the same thing, right?
Yeah, this creates an interesting issue as well. You talked a little bit about how part of this was the discarding of metaphysics, right? The classic understanding, philosophical understanding of telos and these things, and that's true, of course. I do think, however, it is the embracing of another metaphysic. So, Oswald Spengler, I think, very appropriately called Western man Faustian, which, given your allusion to the satanic nature, the Luciferian nature of this temptation, I think is pretty apt. And obviously, some humans are there's some level of human nature that is always going to be tempted by this. But I think particularly, actually, post-Enlightenment rationalist Western Europeans have a particular cultural metaphysic that drives them towards this end. And in a lot of ways, the escaping of all things that have otherwise been dictated or limited by God is something that is deeply built in to the kind of our psyche and our understanding of the world and the way we should move forward. And you kind of hit this in a couple of different areas. I don't know if this was something that was top of mind for you, but whether it's AI creating this infinite space of friends we can have, or lovers we can have, or children we can have, all artificially, or it's it's capital disassembling different aspects of human nature and its limitations and the borders and boundaries and different traditions that make us who we are.
Mhm.
All of these things are things we seem to be driving forward inevitably, whether we want to stop them or not. It seems like we are, from the very beginning, Mary Shelley and the beginning of the sci-fi genre, it was, oh, we created this thing and it's going to destroy us, right? Like that's been the theme since we more or less started doing science in any real and serious way. And yet, despite this constant worry, the AI safetyism and everything that we hear from some of our biggest tech gurus today, ultimately, we seem to do little or nothing to prevent this. And we seem to be driven towards it no matter what. Is there a tragic flaw that will always draw us across this line no matter how we battle it? Or is this ultimately something that can be recaptured by a proper application of discipline and philosophy and understanding of tradition?
Well, I think we are really kind of in the third instantiation of a pattern that we see established in Scripture, where you have the period leading up to the flood in Genesis, where this isn't like crystal clear in the actual text of Genesis, but if you look into the Enochic literature that kind of expands upon it, it talks about how these the fallen angels are interbreeding with Cain's descendants and creating these Nephilim kind of hybrid super beings, half angel, half human creatures. And then these fallen angels are kind of serving as, spirit guides to these clans, these Nephilim clans, and giving them technology, right? So you see that in the text of Genesis itself when it says Tubal-Cain is the first to smelt bronze, and other members of this line are the first to create musical instruments. So these are all technologies, many of which increase the civilization's prowess in war and in kind of divination and ritual and other ways of, other forms of techne that they can use to increase their power over nature and over their fellow man. And the sort of devastation that they cause, the tyranny that they inflict, both on the natural world and on other human beings is really insane. It's described in very graphic detail in the Book of Enoch. And the flood kind of knocks that back. And then you see, once again, kind of another Faustian application of human techne after the flood in the Tower of Babel. And God sort of sets the clock back again. And I think that if you look at that pattern, we're sort of now approaching another such moment where we have sufficient technology, not just to harm creation, to harm our fellow man. It's not just a question of having better weapons or, fossil fuels or whatever that is. It's a question like we can literally unmake humanity. So I think there has always been this sense, that our technology, our techne is dangerous and could lead us to this rebellion against God if we're not held back from doing that. And we currently don't seem to be being held back from doing that. Perhaps some kind of cataclysm is on the horizon that'll put a little more time back on the clock. But I think we're headed toward some kind of point of no return here. I want to be more optimistic about technology. So C.S. Lewis talks about, he goes back to sort of the period of the, where you saw science emerging kind of alongside alchemy, that these were two ways of attempting to master nature through, human technique. And, science worked and alchemy didn't, basically. And that's why science carried forward. But he takes the position, Lewis, that man's conquest of nature is always going to turn around on man and try to become a conquest of human nature, which has the effect of reducing humanity to raw material in the hands of humanity, which at that point, the humanity is no longer a meaningful category, right? We've discarded any idea of human nature. There's no, the fact value distinction, the is-ought problem is totally enshrined in our thinking. So now humans are just whatever humans want to make them, or whatever comes after humans want to make them after that. Recipe for transhumanist dystopia. I'd like to believe that there could, at least hypothetically, be a way to channel our kind of innovative and Faustian impulse in ways that don't attack and degrade human nature itself. So, Elon Musk is a perfect example. he came out with this sort of pornographic AI anime girl that can talk to you on Grok. And I would like him very much to stop doing that and just to build spaceships.
Sure.
I would really like to. I think we can, we could either abolish humanity or we can conquer the stars, and I would much rather conquer the stars. I'd way rather have a colony on Mars than have an infinite virtual metaverse in which we can all lose ourselves.
I do, but this is, and this really is ultimately what I wonder is modernity the great filter? Is that the reason that we never actually, get out there and find alien life in the stars? Because there is a complexity of civilization that reliably returns us back to this. And, as you point out, this is a cycle in the Bible. It's a cycle throughout history. The Bronze Age collapse, the collapse of the Roman Empire, tons of technology and sophistication are lost in any of these periods. And so we see, the human species continue to get up to a certain threshold and then, have a collapse that knocks it back down. But every iteration of this seems to bring us closer and closer to many of the things that you're fearing. And so I do wonder if ultimately this is something that we can get beyond. Now, I am fascinated with the idea of accelerationism. Not the stupid political, application, but the actual technological accelerationism, the cybernetic feedback loops, and how they unmitigated positive feedback leads us to predictable and dangerous places. And so, two thinkers that I have looked at a lot of this are Nick Land and Alexander Dugin. People can feel about them how they like. I don't care. The point is, they're both addressing something no one else is addressing, and as long as they are, I'm going to keep thinking about it. And so both of them recognize that this like runaway cybernetic feedback loop, this feedback between intelligence and production is going to continue to bring us closer and closer to kind of the singularity, closer and closer to the loss of humanity, the abolition of man, as you were alluding to with C.S. Lewis there, where we completely rewrite ourselves into something that is no longer the original program, is no longer originally human in a real sense. And they have two different divergent understandings of how this ends. For Nick Land, it's capital's complete emancipation from us. The capital just completely becomes its own thing. We're nothing but a launch vehicle for this like hyper realization of the like the Faustian Anglo spirit that like launches itself into the stars and leaves its meat puppets behind. Or in the more Dugan-esque understanding, approaching this moment, going through this moment creates a level of absurdity where we recognize that all of the things that we lost, the death of God, all of these things fall away, and we are able to emerge from the other side, re-engaging with the spiritual, re-engaging with the divine. You talk about re-enchantment in your book as well. I know you may not be familiar with those outlooks necessarily in their particulars, but I was wondering, do you lean one way or another? Do you think ultimately we can move along the line of returning to a more spiritual understanding? We can re-embrace those parts of our humanity and become more whole in that way? Or will we continue to move down this track until we have basically jettisoned that which makes us human?
Yeah, well, it's hard to say. I'll say I don't see any meaningful way to restrain transhumanism through just kind of the normal political process or the cultural resources currently available to us. We talked about intentional communities. I'm sure the Amish will be fine, but I don't think that we can form. I think that sort of late liberal society is such that it's prohibitively difficult to form intentional communities on the necessary scale to really push back in this way. And I think that, our politics is, like you said, it's just progressivism driving the speed limit. In this case, it's transhumanism driving the speed limit. There's really, even on the right, most people have lost this kind of classical idea of humanity and human nature and human flourishing. And you saw that in just last year with the Alabama Supreme Court case over IVF, which was an incredibly modest court ruling. Like somebody in the fertility clinic knocked over a petri dish and broke it, and the embryos were destroyed. And Alabama has a wrongful death statute where, if you're in a car accident and you miscarry, you can sue the person who hit you and recover damages for that lost baby. All the court said was, yeah, you can recover damages for an embryo that's destroyed in an IVF lab the same way you can recover damages for an embryo that's destroyed in your womb. And of course, from the left, Handmaid's Tale, hysteria, dystopia, they're going to, high status men are going to make me wear a robe and hold me. The whole meme, but
definitely not a fantasy. Yep.
Yeah, no, not fetish material at all. But the more disappointing thing was from the right, there was an immediate, reaction of no, we didn't mean it. We didn't mean it. Alabama's super majority Republican legislature immediately passes a bill exempting the IVF industry from the wrongful death statute. Republican governor, stalwart pro-life Republican governor signs it. Multiple Republican lawmakers start talking about the miracle of IVF. This is a transhumanist technology. Like, it explicitly severs reproduction from the marital act and inserts, the medical and technological establishment into that with results that we're already seeing are horrifying. Like, embryo screening startups are already giving you a little app where it ranks your embryos, divides them up by gender and tells you which ones are going to be smartest and which ones have potential to develop disorders, and just really turns the relationship from parent-child into consumer product in ways that
I've
grapple with.
It's a weird thing. I've sat at a bar with guys who are doing this illegally. Like they're and that's the thing is, you can restrict this in the United States. You could restrict this, somewhere, but somewhere, some guy in Belize, or or El Salvador or somewhere in Asia is going to do this, right? It's much like the gain of function research. We know it's stupid. We know it's wrong. You could ban it everywhere, but somewhere, some idiot's going to do this.
Yeah,
and this is always the problem.
In the background of the Star Trek universe, someone should make this if they want to do like a really based Star Trek prequel. But in the Star Trek timeline in the 1990s, it's only alluded to very briefly. It's never like filled in really. But there were a series of conflicts called the eugenics wars between China and the West. Yeah, where, apparently the Chinese communists were attempting to kind of genetically engineer themselves into supermen. And there was this, great crusade on behalf of humanity itself to defeat them and destroy these technologies.
So I can out-nerd you one better here. So in Deep Space Nine, Dr. Julian Bashir is actually a genetically modified child. And it's like this huge secret that he has to keep to be in Starfleet the whole time, because they fought this whole war over this, and it's so highly illegal inside of Starfleet that even minor applications of this technology are considered completely disqualifying for basically interacting with society. So they do go back to it in a way, like it becomes this like underground thing that there was a small contingent of families who broke the rules and did this, and he's one of these people, and he's desperately trying to hide it from getting thrown out of the fleet. So
yeah, it's a similar concept to like the Butlerian jihad in Dune, with is usually applied to AI. You shall not make a machine in the image of a man's mind. But the taboo, if you read some of the later novels, the taboo appears to extend to cover artificial reproduction in some senses. There's in Dune Messiah, I think Paul at one point suggests having a child with Irulan through Princess Irulan through IVF, and the Bene Gesserit are like, no, that's against our religion. Like, you should be executed for that. And he says, you can't execute me. I'm the emperor. And it's a whole thing. But yeah, I think absent some kind of strongly enforced religious taboo like that, it would be very difficult for us to push back politically or culturally on transhumanism. I think to stop it or to roll it back, we'd really need some kind of cataclysm. And from there, it just becomes a question of what that looks like. I look at a few scenarios in my book. One would be we kind of go back to just full primitivism, right? Like and then we're just stuck there forever because there's no more easy to extract minerals near the surface of the earth that we could use to bootstrap ourselves into a new industrial age. So, all right, it's just subsistence agriculture forever, and infant mortality goes back up to 70%, and you have to worry about everyone dying if a harvest fails, or your village getting eaten and killed by steppe raiders and all this other stuff. The kind of best case scenario would be, I guess, some kind of solar punk type future where you have a kind of sustainable level of prosperity that's maybe not quite where we are now, but not sort of full on primitivism. And who knows? It's all really a toss of the dice. Who knows what the cataclysm would even look like, or whether there will even be one. But I think that if the kind of Nick Land side of it wins out, that we're really staring down the barrel of the end times, if whether you want to conceive of that religiously or as a metaphor. I think that's what it is.
Well, but you definitely have a eschatological eschatological. Anyway, say that correctly. Implications, of course, in both of these scenarios, and we could go pretty much everywhere for a couple hours with this, because this is a topic that I'm actually rather fascinated with. People should be reading your book so they can get the outline that you're addressing here. But one thing I want to ask before we wrap this up, Peter Thiel recently gave a interview with Ross Douthat of the New York Times, and it really hits on a lot of what you're talking about here, because it's very interesting. I was just at ARC in London a little bit ago. Peter Thiel did this interview with Jordan Peterson, and I was very interested because Thiel directly seemed to address the problem of the Enlightenment, and that the Enlightenment was a huge issue. He actually went right after Cartesian dualism, and we can't know what a real life is by just measuring intelligence. We actually have to embody this, that real value has to be embodied. It has to be divinely given in some way. Thiel has had a strange version of Christianity he's kind of been knocking around for a while here that seemed to be speaking to that. But while recognizing that problem, and what he said there, I thought was relatively insightful, he then turns around to Ross Douthat, and Douthat says more or less, he's like, I'm worried about the Antichrist. I'm worried that green energy will, the Green New Deal will produce some kind of Antichrist. And Douthat looks at him, he's like, aren't you like producing this like global intelligence network and like all these possible transhuman things? Isn't that more likely to yield, or at least as likely to yield some kind of Antichrist? And like feel like almost glitches. Like you think someone needs to run out and restart him there for a second when that happens. What do you read about the future when you look at a man like this, who is probably one of the most powerful guys in this space, probably one of the most thoughtful ones as well? Whatever you think about his philosophical conclusions, he's obviously thinking pretty deeply about these issues and their implications. And yet still, when he's point blank, like, but what if you're doing that? It's just like, probably not. It's fine.
Yeah, there was a great meme about that interview where it was, Peter Thiel looking like a deer in the headlights, and the caption was, when the interviewer hits you with tough gotcha questions like, are you the Antichrist, and do you want humanity to survive?
Right. Yeah. What do you say here? Yeah.
Yeah, he has this whole thing where there's the Antichrist and there's the catacon, that which restrains the Antichrist, and it can be, you can mistake one for the other, right? You can mistake the regime that attempts to restrain technology could actually end up being the global tyranny that becomes the Antichrist, rather than the sort of AI god mainframe or whatever that it's meant to hold back. I actually got to talk to him recently, which was really interesting. I gave him a signed copy of my book, and he said this elsewhere, so I don't feel bad repeating it, but he basically says, like, I don't think transhumanism is ambitious enough. Like, he says, I think transgenderism is just about changing your body. I think that we need to be more ambitious about that. I think it can't change your your heart or your mind or your faith or anything. And I said, well, hold on. Do you want a piece of technology that can do that? Because that's scary. You want the Ayatollah to have a little airport scanner that I step through and come out a Muslim or something? Like, what? I'm not entirely sure what he means by that. But I would definitely lump Thiel in with people like Mark Andreessen and Elon Musk as kind of right-wing progressives, as people who, for them, their presence within the right or Republican coalition is mostly based on this kind of opposition to DEI and other ideologies that they think are restraining meritocracy in some way, that are preventing us from, building the best companies with the best people and using those to create the best products to kind of launch ourselves and bootstrap ourselves into the future. And I think there's a real contempt among those people for those of us who still believe in human nature and in some kind of intrinsic human value that's rooted in who we are and not just in what we achieve. And I think they're really eager to kind of leave us on the ash heap of history. So yeah, these are people that I'm very wary of, and I'm very concerned about their influence within the right.
Yeah, certainly not lacking. Though, as we just saw with Elon and Trump, perhaps the tech right doesn't have quite the hold that they ultimately would like to have, at least not yet. But that said, Grayson, like I say, we could do this for a long time, but we got to limit it a little bit here. Tell people about the name of the book again, where they can find it, how can they pick it up, all that stuff.
Sure, yeah. This is The Transhumanist Temptation, and how technology and ideology are reshaping humanity and how to resist. It's available from Sophia Institute Press. So if you go to sophiainstitute.com/transhuman, that'll take you there. It's always best to buy it straight from the publisher because I get more money. But if you want to get it on Amazon, you can. It's also available on Kindle and as an audiobook. I don't read it. So if my voice is annoying to you, you can still get the audiobook. Someone else read it. And you can follow me on Twitter at Hemingquay, HEMINGQUAY. My DMs are open, so feel free to tell me that I'm wrong and you hate my book.
All right, man. Well, thank you so much for coming on, guys. Make sure to check out that book. And of course, if it's your first time on this channel, make sure to click subscribe on YouTube. Make sure you click the bell and the notifications. Obviously, this is pre-recorded today, so unfortunately, we won't be doing questions, but normally we do the live streams, and you can chime in and when we are there. Of course, if you'd like to get these broadcasts as podcasts, you need to subscribe to the Auron MacIntyre Show on your favorite podcast network. And if you want to support the show, don't forget, we've got merch over at shotblazemedia.com. You can pick up the shirt I'm wearing right now. So if you would like to support the show, you always have that option. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And as always, I will talk to you next time.